into our constitutional rights when it comes to issue of participation, activism, really public involvement, and all of that. And also kind of weigh the pros and cons why things do happen to us, because we become passive and we don't take up the issues ourselves, and sometimes we're just lamenting, complaining, but we're not doing anything about anything. And I think this session has been critical in basically setting the stage in terms of us understanding not only what is our rights, but also how do we go about exercising those rights, so that we are not like people who are only know something, but we don't put into action what we know. Now, the group of people who have been invited is for us, is for them to tell us how have they been active as activists in terms of advocating, taking up issues and so forth. So they will tell us what was the issue, why did they decide to take up that issue, how did they go about advocating for that issue, or what method did they use to make sure that their concerns are being heard, okay? And they are sharing with us that so that we can learn from them and understanding through their experiences what is it what they did and what is it what they achieved and what was their challenges. Whatever they've taken, the issue they've taken up, how did they evaluate that process or the strategy which they took on. And with those few words, I want to invite Nashi. Nashi is already here. He will tell us more about...
So Shut It All Down started around 7th of October 2020, when the news of Shannon came out. Like, human remains were found in the desert. And the speculation was that this might be Shannon, that one of the women that have been missing, one of the people that have been missing for quite a while. And because there was a public campaign, there was like a hashtag already, Find Shannon. I can't remember what it was exactly. For months, since April, there was then this like rage, this roar, this public roar of justice. Young people, women. It was organized overnight on Facebook. Not Facebook, Twitter, using social media, Twitter, Instagram, and all. The next day, 8th of October, we were out there and...
7 minutes we have.
Yes. Remind me when I'm at...
Oh, okay.
At 3. When I'm at 3.
Yeah.
Okay. So it comes from a place of thinking with transgression. Here was a group of young people who were working with the idea of transgression as a way of doing struggle, as a way of organizing. We spoke a lot about respect earlier on today, but this was one of the things that people in the movement, in that protest, it was starting to be formed as a movement, decided that we need to adopt the politics of transgression. And what is that? Don't tell the police that you're going to protest. Let them find us there. Turn up in Parliament. Just turn up and demand to go in. All of us going to the Ministry of Justice and demand for accountability, demand for immediate action. Right? Demand for... we had a petition in that process of those days that would go on and on. So again, what you started to see is that it was not a traditional protest. It was not the usual kind of protest that you would see, for example, in the last 30 years in Namibia. That in the last 10 years, there were all these young new movements were coming up, but they were coming with doing things differently in terms of, and probably not so different, because this is what our leaders also did, right? So using the politics of disruption, using the strategies of disruption, twerking in front of that police officer who is old enough to be a father. because you're disrupting the respectability politics, and it is the respectability politics. And you're not disrespecting anyone by twerking in front of them. You are disrupting the order so that people can pay attention, right? So we're moving from tradition to transgression, and pointing out that transgression is also knowledge. That for us to have a constitution today was transgression. And obviously, with transgression, we were dealing with the issue of sexual and gender-based violence, right? We were responding to that. There have been several other protests already. One of the demands in the petition, there are many demands around education, institutions and schools, the government, the law. We were a bit limited in terms of connecting, and thanks to our comrades here at the Trust, who are constantly reminding us that we're not taking the economic aspect into consideration. We're just dealing with this issue more as a social issue, but not so much connecting how gender-based violence has everything to do with the economics. You know? So obviously, because we were transgressing in the Namibian house, there's a price to pay for that. You get punished, because by the third day, go to the malls. That's when the guns came out. I mean, the guns were there already. There was tear gas already in Parliament, the first, you know. So that left a lot of trauma and all that stuff. And I mean, there's so much to speak about. What has changed? Not so much has changed. I think, yes, there is a new, refreshing energy around gender justice, conversation around that, in a way that hasn't always been very central, I think. That we're speaking a lot about gender justice. We're speaking about queer rights, LGBTIQ. The feminist voice is pushing its way through, and it's saying, look, we have colonial laws that are keeping us behind. Right? But I wanted to talk about something, and I think I might end on this point, which is about, for me, yes, so there's a shift in terms of what we are trying to focus on and pay attention on now as a country, and it's challenging. One of the demands was that Doris Yoka must resign. She didn't resign. Still a struggle, right? So there was a shift, but there's also, I think, major challenges, not just with politicians not doing anything, but with ourselves as activists. And this is something we want to also reflect on right now, because let's talk about the elephant in the room. So the movement has also had bad publicity of winning money from the AU, and you know, these are important questions about, as an activist, how much of self-purification are you doing as an activist? These are questions we are asking ourselves now. If we are not doing self-care, if we are not doing introspection, the art of looking at ourselves, how are we going to change the country? How are we going to change? If we are not working on that level of critical reflection, how are we going to come out of this leadership crisis that we have today? How many more minutes do I have?
One.
Okay, perfect. So that's very important, and I think we've spoken a lot about it, we've pointed fingers, and we are very good at that. But what's important, I think we need to walk away with is, we need to, what I think shut it all down to for me, and I'm a scholar. I'm interested in protest. This is what my work is about. So I'm an artist, but I'm also interested in that knowledge about how do we protest. I appreciated the presentation from the gentleman earlier around the different ways of organizing. Ideology, it's limiting. So important, but it's still important. So where are we standing? What are our values? And I think that's the crisis that we have. Is this around working the personal, doing your own work, working on your own traumas, checking out when am I taking up too much space as a man, because we have a problem of patriarchy in this country, right? This is what, for me, this movement talk is bringing out for me. It's interesting as a thinker, but also as an activist.
Thank you so much. Let's give him a okay, our next presenter is Dr. Tsekpo from Parliament.
Thank you. I just want to thank all the protocols that have been established. Essentially, I also want to note that on your programs you have Parliament, PRT. I'm not exactly from the PRT. I do a project in Parliament. And essentially, that project stems from the fact that we think Parliament needs the support of those of us who are outside the public sector. Essentially, what I want to say is that your discussion this morning was very insightful. But then the organ, Parliament, that organ of state, perhaps is the most conservative of the three organs of state. You may not notice it here, but in other places like West Africa, where we do have overthrows of government, where the constitution, which we were eloquently discussing, Parliament is the catchword. So Parliament is that conservative, and you will see that in the constitution you have, they've been asked to organize their own way of conducting their activities, because traditionally they tell you there is no school where parliamentary studies is done, as we used to have the law schools training people for the judicial arm of government and the public sector training people for other arms of the or other organs of the executive organ of government. So essentially, Parliament makes its own rules, and essentially, if you want to understand Parliament, then you must look out for their rule book, just as we are all using the Constitution. And that rule book is called the Standing Orders, generally speaking. Here we talk about the standing rules and orders of the Parliament of Namibia. Yes, the National Assembly has one, and the National Council has one. They are similar. But essentially, in that rule, they define what they mean by public hearing. And this is what I want to read to you from that rule book. Public hearing in Parliament means a meeting conducted by a legislative committee. We call them one of the standing committees of Parliament, to solicit comments and testimony from the general public or any organ on any matter before the assembly or committee, as the case may be. So essentially, it is the time that Parliament comes into the public space and opens the space to you. Otherwise, when you enter Parliament, you are considered a stranger. Anybody who is not elected, anybody who is not an official is considered a stranger. But in public hearings, they open the space to us. And this rule book, which I mentioned to you, the standing rules and orders, defines what the committees can do. So if they open their space to you, it's important to look out for where you can enter. One of the interesting things I find in the rule book in the Parliament here is that the committees have been charged to, at all times, have regard to promote reduction of poverty among Namibians. I'm not seeing it in any other rule book in any of the parliaments I've dealt with. I've dealt with quite a number of them on this continent. But this rule is important when you interrogate whatever parliament has, or what in public hearings in particular, which opens the committees to you, check whether they are going by these rules. And essentially, there is a general terms of reference for committees to work on, and I will highlight a few of them that make reference to this public hearing we are talking about. The rules, that book is a public book. You can find it on the website of Parliament and have it alongside the Constitution. Rule 64 says that the committees should be able to organize meetings between citizens, community groups, sectoral organizations, members of parliament, and representatives of the owners of ministries and agencies of state enterprise, and exchange views regarding the operations of the relevant institutions and their effect on the communities and groups in society. They must also be able to conduct investigative and oversight hearings and make recommendations to, again, the offices, ministries, and the state, parastatals, and all that in the functioning of their administrative work. And these same committees are charged to monitor and possibly inquire of the legislative program, the budget, everything that the government does. So if they open the space to us, it is important that we enter. And this parliament has the function of listening our petitions, as we have mentioned, and they designated a particular standing committee they call the Constitutional and Legal Affairs to look at these petitions. So essentially what it is that they do when they want a public hearing is what you must know. That yes, they will try to organize and mobilize the community as the case may be. If we identify a suitable venue, I think the last time we had a chance with some people said, when they come and stay in the regional office or a district office, it prevents people from walking to them or transporting themselves to the regional centers. But yes, they will make those arrangements. And in those arrangements, they are also expected to identify key holders, the key stakeholders who understand the issue under investigation. So they may write to you to help us, because essentially Parliament is supposed to help evaluate whatever is presented by government and to give their own view on it to the government.
2 minutes.
2 minutes. Thank you. I'll be there. Essentially, publicizing what they intend to do by either advertising, by requesting memos from you, is the way they operate. And I mentioned they are a conservative institution as parliaments all about. They operate by the law. They tell you this is the law because we work with the law and we formulate laws. We can't formulate laws and we don't use them. So they will do this and request for your attendance. And very often they will publish that we are meeting here, but they don't have enough information about this publication. Traditionally, they used to put them in newspapers. If you enter any parliament building, you have a big notice board. And the first thing that is there, they call it the order paper. What is happening in parliament? All these are open, and incidentally, the rules in Namibia are quite open. Parliament is open to all of us. Now, essentially, when they put up the adverts, check whether you have enough reach. If you don't have enough reach, you can let them know. I've been reminded that recently there was supposed to be a meeting on 26th October, and they put up the advert on 25th October. Yes, and the advert says media invitation. It is not clear whether other stakeholders have already been informed. But these are the issues. Can you prepare enough even if you are a professor on the subject? Definitely you need to organize your thoughts before you go to the course.
Thank you.
Yeah, so essentially, your obligation as you go there is to make sure that you are helping them take a useful decision. Useful can be defined, I'm sure my ideology friends will discuss it separately. Now, essentially, you must understand what the investigation. So your own research, which has been, I think, spoken of clearly this morning, about how to prepare for your advocacy. Then, once you've done your own research, you must make sure that you are properly located as the context in which you are going to make the presentation. Equip yourselves and then make sure that it's credible information. Not all information we find today is credible because everything that technically if you go before Parliament, you are going under oath. You are presenting what can be verified. And that is important for us to do. So public hearings are a good tool to give you space. Citizens are allowed to come in. You can submit a memorandum written. You can beg for space to give oral presentation. Sometimes when you're written memorandum, practice a lot of review. But we must always monitor Parliament to receive the notices and know what is going on in all of the websites. Committees meetings are all publicized. This is something we should do. Thank you so much.
Yes, go ahead.
All right, good afternoon. In my presentation days, this is one session that I outlined. It's after that. So I won't take much of your time. So also I'm going to disagree with you for the last session. Well, like Sophie said, my name is George Kambala. I'm an activist with the Untitled Chapter movement. A movement was started about 8-9 years ago because of the very time it was an issue around housing. I think you guys might have heard that time when the issues they were called golden kids. That means that kids are special, also don't deserve land and housing. So we said that why are we categorizing children in the country? Fundamentally, all levels. So we said that no, if we're going to pick up this issue, we're going to go put up a plot in Kinakuba. Why Kinakuba? Because it's closer to, at that very time, we think you know that it's close to Yuna. It's close to Widows Acre because our ancestors are there, so we need guidance. We can always just walk to Widows Acre. And also because that's where the rich people are. So if you want to put up a shed in the Kinakuba, imagine the price drops of those houses. Probably you have a house of worth $5 million. Now is the shed there, so the probably value is probably like 2.5. So that was the reason why we did it. And we further about that.
Sorry, can you block the screen because everybody is now looking at it.
Right. So, yeah, what was it? So 2015, 2014 was a great year. We got young people to start voicing their issues out proudly. And that was the first time when I met with young people also. Yeah, so fast forward, we came into 2015. 2015, so the parliament wanted to build a $2 billion parliament. Just like behind the current parliament, there's a gym that has housing facilities to house themselves, office space, hotels. So we said that no, as young people, there's already an issue about housing. A lack of housing where young people can't afford a decent home. People are living in sheds. And we're trying to say that how can our politicians be so misaligned, where people need housing and then you have to put yourself for 2 billion in parliament. So what we decided is that we're going to make sure that this thing does not get off the ground. We're going to make sure that it's stopped. Now, what the second that we decided that time is that at that point in time, Facebook was big, but not really as big as now. WhatsApp was a bit was sort of the way we were able to communicate our messages. But the key thing is that we're on the ground ourselves. So instead of having discussions at schools, LRCs, and UNAV, and in church, we wrote to churches. I think we wrote about 100 letters to different church dominions. We went to youth groups on the ground. We met them in youth groups, in the offices. We met young people at Brian. So everywhere where a young person was we're able to reach out to them. And so guys don't this must fall. So when that happened, I was excited. June 16 because it's a youth day. Young people around the world, or maybe in Africa at the time, because their lives trying to stand up against Africans and so on. And we said that for us also, it means also a lot because we are young people, we are brave, or let's say, particular for our rights, right? What you believe in. So we were able to get almost 5,000 young people to come on the streets. I think that was the biggest march this country has seen before. I mean, after independence, was after independence. Because young people were from all over the country came to the They're so popular, they're so popular, but everybody could resonate with us, both young and old people. We both participated in the march. To the extent where even the police officers had to go home and change and then come to the protest with us. So we protested on June 16. Now, on June 16, it was also beyond just the protest. Two things were happening in the country. On one side, there was the Prime Minister of India was in the country, and the Speaker was going to Parliament on the particular day. So the previous guy who had told this had a meeting with the General, the army guys. Said, no, you just can't do your march. Tomorrow we will march past the Golf, because the Prime Minister of India is here. The security, we don't have enough manpower to assist both the Prime Minister and the young people. So you guys must call off. They said, no, there's no way we're going to call off this thing. Either you tell the Prime Minister of India to stay in the State House or wherever he's staying, so that you guys help him security. And then you bring your manpower to us, because we, first of all, we are citizens of this country. We're not enough our rights. So the Prime Minister of India, wherever he is, can stay wherever he is. Probably postpone his meeting, the president, and everybody else. Then the guy said, no, Mr. Kambala, you just can't do these things. Let us find a way. He said, no. And we're going to Parliament. We are going to Parliament, and then so far, no, guys, this international media is here. You cannot come to Parliament. Yeah, I'll finish now. So once we did that, we are thinking, okay, fine, we're not going to Parliament, but go to the circle, Cinema Circle. That's why we had it. But then our condition was that if we are going to the circle, the Speaker was coming to receive a petition that day. So no, but the Speaker is busy with the President. No, two things. If you are going to compromise not going to Parliament, then the speaker, you must ensure that the speaker is there. And we had the Kambala at the side meeting a waiver. That if you don't ensure that Kachilili is there tomorrow, we will march from there to Parliament instead. So, few months later, we did the protest actually came and received the petition signed by over 5,000 Namibians. Few months later, the Parliament discussion got cancelled. All the plans around Parliament, the new Parliament was then cancelled during because of the protest. Because young people that represent time were united against and for one cause. Thank you very much.
The town was triggered by one of the murders, not an isolated. Was that one murder too many that triggered a response? And the response was, if this happens, then we can't be constrained by the norms, by doing things business as usual. And so a movement formed that was deliberately disrupting the order, going into the malls, blocking access, provoking a police response, and showing it can't be business as usual. Highlighting the conservative laws and practicing, and Nashi pointed out also the importance of looking at what you're doing and how you're doing this. The parliamentary hearings, public hearings, are a different kettle of fish. Actually, quite the opposite. It's all strictly according to the book. These are the rules and regulations. You must follow them to the letter, otherwise no go. And the submissions must be very factual, either in written or in oral form. With AR, it was a bit similar to the shut it all down, that in the midst of the housing crisis, when 40% of Namibians are living in sheds, when we have a backlog like now, 300,000 units, Parliament is concerned with building luxury for themselves only. And so the youth then was mobilized through discussions. Isn't it outrageous? We live in sheds. They want gyms, restaurants, and fancy hotels for themselves. And they managed to get a march to Parliament. And the direct pressure through that march led to the discussion on the new Parliament basically being cancelled, and we didn't have it. And then the final example now took on a much bigger issue. It took on inequality at a global scale, as reflected also in the USA. And despite the protests, the immediate aim was not achieved, but it laid the foundation of saying the system is a problem. And the conclusion was to succeed, there is a need for a political strategy. It can't just be a camp and a protest, it must be a political strategy. So maybe around that we can have the discussion.
Okay, the floor is open. Oh, there's two hands just before. Another third one. Is there a young person who will start running around with his mic? I'm so tired. Okay, that's fine. Okay, start with
my question is just that from the video and the two comments that spoke, it appears that the capital continue to influence politicians, and then politicians use the security apparatus to suppress the masses. How are we going to bypass that process? Because I think that is the major challenge that we are facing in addressing our problems.
Yeah, mine is also for the doctor. In regards to the public hearing, if one citizen has got an oral questioning or submission, when you have follow-up in regard to the feedback, and if you have an impact of whether it's motion or the feedback.
Very good question. The gentleman in white, and then the gentleman and the lady in the far east.
Yes, the question goes to the man in the
Nashi?
Yeah, so he spoke of colonial laws that are keeping us back. So I just wanted to ask him, are these laws in practice today, and they are, what are these laws and how are they keeping us back?
Okay.
So let's say that again. Say it again. In my head, the voice was coming from there. Then I realized.
It's okay. Can you repeat your question?
Okay, so he spoke of the colonial laws that are keeping us back. So I wanted to ask him, what laws are they still in practice and how are they keeping us back?
Okay. I just want to allow two more before I give the chance. Two more and then eight. Yeah. Him? Yes.
Right, thank you for the opportunity. First, I just have a question, not really a question, but a comment, but a question to the Shut It All Down movement. I'm really impressed by the work that you guys have done, like when you started the protest in 2020. Now coming to my question, last year it was reported that some funds that were given to the movement were actually stolen. Did you guys manage to recover the funds? Because the funds were made to for the protest and do community work. So the question is, have you guys recovered those funds?
Okay.
Second question is to activist George Kambala from the affirmative movement. I just wanted to find out what's your movement's view on the current Namibian laws with regard to property that states that land that was taken from our black people should be expropriated, but with just compensation. What's your view on that specific section of the law?
Okay.
Thank you.
The lady next to you.
I'm grateful for the opportunity. Yes, my question goes to the Shut It All Down movement. I just want to know, why did you guys choose disruption as one of your motivations for your goals? Why go that way? Why not involve the court? What was the major idea behind the whole disruption thing? And then my next question goes to Dr. of Parliament. How does Parliament ensure that a layman gets to access the standing rules and orders of Parliament, and that those rules of Parliament are comprehended and interpreted to them in a manner that a layman would understand it? Because now it's just in Parliament, and somebody from the village will just come and, just not know what exactly is going on. So briefly, my question is just, how does Parliament ensure that a layman gets to comprehend the standing rules and orders of Parliament? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the question. I think I'll start with your question, why disruption? Urgency. We want urgency. We want the issue to be treated as urgent as possible. One of the demands was for the first citizen to declare a state of emergency. It's a war. It's a war on women's bodies. It's a war on men's bodies. It's a war on human beings' bodies. It's a war, and there is no sense of urgency, right? That's why disruption. That's why block traffic intersections in the city. But also because we have the heritage of disruption. It's just that Namibian nationalism doesn't teach us that. They won't teach you transgression in school. So I studied drama. They won't teach you how to break the rules. They only teach you the rules. But they don't teach you that breaking the rules is another way of making knowledge. And that we have those histories. Liberation struggle was about breaking the rules. Right? Funds recovered. I think some of the funds were recovered, but the challenge is that this is a citizen-led movement. There is no structure, and that's why somebody could apply on themselves and say, I'm the movement, yes, because they kind of in a way was part of pressing that button and saying, let's go protest. Applies, funds come, we are in the dark, we are asking the whole time, where are the funds? We have been screwed. And then, now crisis. So part of it was recovered, and I think a lot of it has gone into some interventions such as, there was I think a feminist festival, right? Because a lot of the shutting all down came from that. I don't know what else it went to. I've been a little bit out of the loop because I was out of the country, but I think most of it, if not all of it, has been recovered. But the challenge is that the not structure, the not having the structure, things tend to be very tough. Colonial laws, oh yes, so many of them. The anti-sodomy laws, the anti-reproductive justice laws, the law that says abortion is illegal, that's a colonial law. The law that says sodomy is illegal, those are laws that were enacted during colonial times. And they restrict the choice, the freedom of choice that we were learning today about. That's why I came early, because I also don't know these legislature things. They're speaking about choice, right? And they're not just law, they define a lot of our public imagination. That's why many people still don't understand that gays are human beings. Transgender people are people. It's your children, it's my child, it's your sister, it's your brother. I'm trying to be fast because a lot of questions. Is it possible how can we act against this application of security forces? In feminism, there's something called abolition. And abolition tries to teach us that there is a way to respond to violence without using the prison-industrial complex, without taking people to jail. There is a way to restore the human spirit. And that is work that we have to pick up and adopt and learn and so forth. And it relates to Ubuntu. It relates to Ubuntu. To say that even a perpetrator, their spirit can be restored. And that's why I'm very interested in masculinity and men. Yes, I'm a feminist. I go out and say femicide. This Geo Mama, let's go to parliament. But I'm also very interested in why are men killing them. There's another crisis, femicide, it's suicide. The men, like my brothers, there's something we have to sit with and work through. I think I'm gonna stop there for now. But all in all, I think I want to say that it's questions about movement building. We have to focus on building our movements. And a lot of that work is the personal work and the community. We do terrible things which are in activist spaces, not just politicians. Solidarity and movement building.
Yes, thank you, sir. And please just keep your answers very straight. We are running out of time.
Okay, thanks. Essentially, if you participate in public hearings, yes, a report is done. As soon as that report is tabled in Parliament, it becomes a public document again. And it is for us to follow up on those reports and see what the implementation is like. Because when a report is tabled in Parliament and it is adopted, a written memorandum follows that report to the ministry or agency that is involved. Because in reality, Parliament doesn't do any implementation. Remember, we were told they are lawmakers. So they debate, they adopt a report, and then once the report is adopted, it is public document, it is available. They follow it up with a letter to the ministry involved. These are our recommendations. It is again for me and you to monitor what is happening in the ministries, in the offices, whether implementation is really happening, and then we raise the alarm again in Parliament. So it is a continuous work. It hasn't ended, otherwise we don't get it. Access to the rules, which are that written in very elegant Queen's language sometimes. Yes, again, that is where we come in. Sometimes our politicians in parliament themselves cannot comprehend those rules. So yes, so I see the activism that is happening, the simplification of the laws and all that we have seen in the materials that you were given. Yes, some of that is done by those of us who are outside parliament, non-state actors, supporting them to translate some of these rules and make the rules available to citizens. We can always do that. I have been doing that, supporting members to understand what it is that we talk about when we say budget. What is it that we talk about when we say oversight of the budget? How do you ensure that ministries are implementing the budget that is passed? That is how I came to Parliament. Okay.
Yes, thank you very much.
Right, thank you. On the exploration, well, the Constitution makes a provision for land to be expropriated for national building, for nation building. So that's one. That the government is serious. This provision for that you can take land acquisition for nation building. For example, if the state was serious to their certified, instead of selling we will expropriate it with art compensation because it's a national asset. They came from. Or they can say, well, no, we're taking it under various farm because we're going to put up a school or a teaching center or agriculture. So the state can is provision for that business. With me, I don't really agree that land that was stolen should be paid for. I think I believe that land should be expropriated with art compensation because there's no justification of being paid land that my grandfather or forefather were killed for. Can you say secondly, is sort of on the laws. See, the problem in this country is that our politicians like to work on our administrations, like to work on laws and first. So, for example, I'll give you an example of what happened sometime like in 2003 or 2008. So, Derek has a farm somewhere in Uganda. And that time was the Minister of Land for no housing. So he called a few top lawyers to his house, to his farm, because the people were stealing his cattle. Every time he goes to the farm, cattle are missing or cattle are killed or So he called a few lawyers to his farm and said, Monday morning I want to go to Parliament and deal with this problem. So that's how we find. So the lawyers came together, put up a bill. It's called stock theft. Stock theft bill or something like that. The Amendment Act, yes. So now, if you steal a chicken, you get 50 years. If you steal a chicken, or if you steal a goat, you get 10 years or 20 years. But if you somebody gets like 5, 7 years. So with him, he said because he's directly affected by the stock theft, he said, no, I'll teach now people now, let's say that stop stealing So our politicians, I'll teach. So with regard to laws in the country, that's one of our biggest challenges in terms of regard to laws, and also, and the colonial laws are also being currently implemented in the country. So lastly is on my brother there, on assessing the guilt. So with AI, we have what we call the evidence guilty life. Also, this application to the Parliament has a forum where you are able to give citizens can give bills to Parliament. And through AI, because of the net issues, that you also get access through that platform to give a proposal to Parliament. And through the process, Parliament keeps giving us reports on timely as when it's going to be tabled in Parliament. So this year it should go into discussion.
Yes, thank you very much. I hope we have answered your questions. I'm going to hand it to you.
Thank you so much. You're so cute. Okay, did you look at your time? What's the time? Time to go. Okay. All right. I just want to apologize for those of you who still have your questions. I know there's so many questions. I don't want to open up a Pandora box for us to have a lot of questions. I can see most of you are already, your energy is going low. But you need to understand that what we have done today is really a milestone. And I just want to thank you, all of you, for participating and being active in this debate. And I'm hoping that even though you would not grasp everything, at least you go with some